Welcome back to the final episode of the first season of the Faith and Ecology podcast, an initiative of the Jesuits for Climate Justice, Faith in Action at COP30 campaign. I'm your host, Daniela, and as the world holds its breath and looks to the horizon, COP30 emerges as a defining moment on the journey towards climate justice. So let us dive deep into what's at stake in just a couple of days' time, when the global community will once again converge with high hopes and urgent demands to reignite momentum and push past the hurdles of previous negotiations. Together with our insightful guests, we will explore the critical themes and tensions shaping the road to Belém, uncovering what this historic summit means for the future of our common home and global community. So join me as we reflect, anticipate, and prepare to step forward into this new chapter. The first guest joining us today is Cristobal Emilfork. He is a Jesuit priest and doctoral candidate in socio-environmental anthropology and science and technology studies at the University of California, Davis. His research focuses on how knowledge about glaciers and climate change is created and understood. Cristobal also explores the socio-spiritual dimensions of climate change, investigating how spirituality can encourage care for ecosystems. He has participated in major climate conferences like COP28, 29, and SP62, and will be joining us live from COP30. Welcome, Cristobal. Let me jump right in. In your experience attending the previous COPs, what makes COP30 unique?
I would say that one of the main things that really struck me at the first time was the performative dimension of it, in the sense that you will find literally thousands of people that already know what they're supposed to do during this 12 days. It's a totally different kind of world in a sense that there is a totally different language. So everything is very well coordinated. So you have parties, you have group of parties, you have people that is doing advocacy, you have people like trying to make some business. And so it's really, really interesting for me as an anthropologist to observe those kind of happenings. Another thing that is most related with the process itself is, despite the fact that it's a very slow process, I think that is one of the most valuable spheres where you can find international dialogue actually happening, like multilateralism in play. I think that it's a kind of sacred space for dialogue where every part has an equal weight during the COP process itself.
What, in your opinion, would be some of the key decisions that we should be keeping an eye out for during the COP? What exactly would those decisions mean for the future of climate justice at this point in time?
That's a very interesting question because you have a lot of independent actions, climate policy actions trying to reach some milestones. But I could say that it's really important that this COP is being held in Brazil, in the sense that it's in the Amazons and is one of the most iconic places where actually climate change is being perceived by most vulnerable people. I think that that is a huge challenge for the presidency, meaning for the Brazilian presidency. The presidency called this COP the COP of the people. So we really need to know or to pay attention to the fact that if it's going to really be a COP of the people, meaning that most vulnerable people, indigenous communities are going to be really listened to in the COP. Another really important thing is that climate change in Europe, for example, there are a lot increasing complaints due to the fact that transition policies being costly, budgets are being affected by this. To me, it's really interesting to see how we as a society, we can deal with this bad press that climate change policies are having now in international environments. And to be more specific, climate finance is going to be a really important topic. And then to check how the countries are submitting the new climate action plans, which are called NDCs, nationally determined contributions for the next 5 years.
Is there something specific that you believe faith-based communities in these spaces bring to this particular COP that also needs to be looked at outside of the policy, outside of the arena of the blue and green zones?
Yeah, because this process is mostly being directed by topics like finance and policies, but there are not many people talking about the moral dimension of this. So how we can really think about the people that is suffering the most first, and secondly, we really need to change our ways of living in our common lives, especially in the global north, but also in places more affordable, with people that lives with less economic problems in the global south. So we really need to change that. And faith-based organizations, I think that they have the power to look at the ways in which we behave ourselves in our everyday lives, to look at it in a way that could be observed critically and to try to foster change in that way. I would love to see the Society of Jesus and the Jesuits and their works, schools, social apostolates in all the world looking at this dimension, socio-ecological dimension, taking a leading play in their respective works. I would love to see in nation schools being leaders, and I think that's critical because we are not able to see what is going to be the world in the coming centuries. So we really need to take seriously and in a more protagonist way the role of climate action and social environmental justice in our different kind of apostleships, I would say.
Our next guest is Colm Fahy. He is a University of London graduate in history and international cultures. Colm has worked at the Jesuit social centers in both London and now in Brussels, where he currently serves as an ecology advocacy officer. He has followed UNFCCC conferences since COP26, leading multinational Jesuit networks in climate justice initiatives. Thank you so much for joining us. My first question for you is, which key thematic areas do you see as most critical in the final stages of the negotiations at COP30, and why?
So I've followed with the Jesuits, with the Society COPs for 5 years. And this year I was at SP62. The real urgency is come across this idea of time running out. We've got about 10 years to resolve the climate crisis. I mean, what do I mean by that? I mean that if we're on the current trajectory that we're on in terms of global warming, then we could expect +4 warming by the end of the century. So that means a baby being born today would be living in greenhouse temperatures by the time they're 70 at the end of the century. What I hope for Brazil is that there will be an urgency, and we've lacked that in the last couple of COPs because they've been in these sort of petro states. I think Brazil is a good location because it is in the heart of the Amazon. There will be a greater emphasis on indigenous populations, on a just transition. So I think Brazil gives an opportunity for this sort of optimism going forward.
Looking at these NDCs that have been submitted, how do you see this implementation taking place over the next 5 years from a policy perspective?
Well, it's a difficult one, really, because some countries have produced their NDCs. I'm from the UK, and the government there is quite pro-climate at the moment. So the NDC is not too bad. I'm sort of more concerned about the ones to come. How will China make an impact? I think that's going to be really interesting. So now with the US turning its back on renewable energy and all of the processing of this solar and other renewables happening in China, which is bringing the price down, how can Africa and how can the developing world harness this opportunity? I think that shows you a tension going forward. I suppose we call it the global north and the global south. This tension really is coming alive, especially in the loss and damage and in the just transition policies. So when it comes to just transition, the global north really see this as a workers' rights thing. So developed countries want to just limit the just transition framework so that it focuses on the rights of miners, the rights of retraining miners, human rights, and so on. Whereas developing countries are really talking about tools which go further than that. So how can gender be included, a gender action plan? How can indigenous rights be included? You must remember that 54% of critical minerals are on the lands of indigenous peoples. They want a plan which considers indigenous rights, which considers the rights of women, which considers the rights of local populations. Whereas developed countries, you can see, want the rights very much of miners. And what I see there is developed countries wanting to escape responsibility. They feel that, they're paying a lot for climate change already. They really think, we need to try and dodge as many of these climate obligations as we can by limiting the debate. I don't think European or global north countries are trying to say we don't want the lost and damaged infrastructure, we don't want the just transition infrastructure, but they want to limit it so they can spend less money on it. The shame there is that we need public money much more than we need private money, because that is where we can secure grants rather than loans. If it's private money, then a lot of that money needs to be paid back with interest. A lot of it is connected to the banks, and the banks which have all of these connections to fossil fuels. At JESC, we talk a lot about future generations, investing in the future, policy which is long-term. The people who inherit our world inherit a world fit for future generations. A lot of countries in the global north at the moment, I think, are short-sighted. It's so interesting, the faith dimension, because actually the whole climate change agenda is a moral question. What I believe when I speak to faith groups, when I talk to Jesuits, when we do ecumenical activities when it comes to climate, is a very powerful moral message, which is actually, we inherited this earth. Climate change is compromising the beautiful world which we inherited. And our message is that it will be hard to deliver the energy transition. It will be hard to deliver climate justice, but we have a moral obligation. That moral obligation is more important than many of the current issues governments feel they need to pay for. I think it's really powerful. And actually, faith leaders are a bit different. They can, they have that experience of a grassroots people, of representing indigenous populations, of representing the poor. So I think it's so important that COPs really harness that. I understand that there will be a lot of action, a lot of activism, and a lot of people who really carry the concern of the world in their hearts, who are going to be at Belém, and I look forward to meeting them.
Our last guest for today is none other than Patricia Tahirindray. She is the program coordinator at the Arrupe Center, Madagascar. Before joining full-time in 2020, she worked in finance and at microfinance institutions while actively volunteering with the center. Her current work includes initiatives on climate justice, youth empowerment, and community resilience, linking research, education, and local actions. She also collaborates in the initiatives of the Global Ignatian Advocacy Network for Integral Ecology, actively contributing to regional and global reflections and advocacy efforts, such as this campaign. She will be joining us live in Belém as well. Thank you so much for being here today. What role do you believe faith communities can play in influencing the outcomes of COP30?
So when you look at what is happening around the COP discussions, many of us feel a kind of fatigue. So many talks, so many promises, but still little action on the ground. The real challenge is not our presence, it's how much we are actually heard. Our voice is often welcomed, but not always listened to when decisions are made. And yet, faith communities have something unique to bring. We are close to the people. They live with them, listen to them, and share their struggles. Because of that, they can become true spokesperson for the population, a real voice of the voiceless. When they speak, they carry the stories, the fears, and the resilience of millions who are rarely heard. And this human voice has the power to touch hearts, even in spaces where numbers and policies often dominate. So what makes faith communities special is that they bring a moral and social perspective, not just a technical one, to one that speaks about climate justice, care for creation, intergenerational responsibility, and loss and damage as a moral debt. But to influence outcomes more effectively, faith communities themselves also need to become more strategic. We need to speak with a more united voice, build stronger coalitions across faith traditions, and connect our moral convictions to concrete policy proposals. In their institutions, parishes, and schools, they gain credibility and their message carries more weight. At the same time, faith actors can play strategic advocacy role inside the negotiation spaces, meeting with national delegations, sharing real stories from the ground, and reminding policymakers that every climate decision is not just a technical choice. It's a moral one that affects human lives. And remind leaders that behind every target, there are families and futures at stake. But again, for this influence to be real, it requires space, recognition, and willingness to listen. The step is not only for governments to listen more, but also for us as faith communities to prepare better, to collaborate more deeply, and to bring both moral strength and professional clarity into these spaces. For me, my hope for COP30 is that faith communities will not only be present and visible, but truly listened to. When that happens, climate policies become more just, more inclusive, and more rooted in the realities of people's lives. Outside the COP space, faith communities around the world are already taking real and creative action to advance climate justice. And that is true in our context here in Madagascar. So at the Centre Arrupe Madagascar, we try to live this mission every day. We combine research, education, and concrete actions to respond to the environmental challenges our communities face. We conduct studies to understand these problems in depth, and we use the results to guide our programs from community adaptation to advocacy. We strengthen the capacities of associations already active in environmental work, so that their actions can have a deeper and more lasting impacts. Also, we train young people to become agents of change and environmental peace mediators, because in Madagascar, conflicts over land and water are becoming more frequent as the effects of climate change intensify. We also promote green entrepreneurship, supporting women and young people to develop small businesses that create income while protecting environment. The Arrupe Center recently gathered Catholic associations, federations, and religious congregations to bring them together in their one shared ecological mission. So we are now structuring this network to make commitments more concrete and measurable. And our next step is to open this collaboration to other faith traditions, because climate justice is a shared moral responsibility. Through all this effort, faith is what inspires and gives meaning to our work. It transforms our concern, its commitment, and reflection into action. And as Laudato Si reminds us, the struggle for climate justice is above all a story of relationships, reconciliation with God, with one another, and with the earth, our common one.
So, as we bring this first season of the Faith and Ecology podcast to a close, let us reflect on our journey together so far. From exploring what the COP30 is and why it exists, to learning about agroecology and food sovereignty, all the way to understanding the role of critical raw materials in the just energy transition process and the importance of climate finance and spirituality on the road to the care for our common home. Each of our guests have made it clear that faith communities are vital drivers for climate justice. As Greta Thunberg powerfully says, you must act as if the house is on fire, because it is. COP30 is a critical moment. It's time for faith communities, Indigenous peoples, governments, the private sector, and civil society to act decisively for justice and inclusivity. The future of our common home depends on what we do now. So thank you for listening and following along. It has been my honor to host you, and stay tuned for all the action live in Belém by going to www.ecojesuit.com. Let's walk boldly together towards a just and sustainable future for all.